Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ideas Sin. My name is Denise. I am your host, and today I'm really excited to introduce to you Zackary. Zackary, how's it going?
Pretty fantastic, as long as the blackmail doesn't go the wrong way. New inside joke.
I know. We'll see. We'll see. You know. So you and I met at a public speaking event. And so what got you out there? What made you want to check that event out?
Well, I mean, as far as the things that I think you find in your life, when you get courageous, that there's certain things that pull you, regardless of what exactly that purpose is. And I got to that event because I knew that I was personable. I had kind of learned that through my work and through my connections with people. And so it was just one of those testing things. It was, I had visions, and I still have visions of where I want to place myself in the world. And public speaking is one of those things that I think eventually is going to become a route, to speak about my writing, to speak about my philosophies and stuff like that. And so I think that's kind of how I ended up in that place with all these other people that, had whatever reasons to be there and learn how to speak formally in public. And it was a very raw, intimidating, but interesting experience where I got to meet a lot of people, and I got to meet you. So
yeah, it was intimidating when you're put on the spot, and she's like, so the facilitator, Sammy, she was introducing the concepts of elements and using like speaking with fire versus water versus earth and wind, and just going through each one of those and being like, what do I sound like in each of these elements? Like, it's just, it was very interesting to get into. Yeah. Intimidating.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about it, though, is that it kind of opens you up to the whole public speaking thing when she asks you to present yourself, when maybe it's not something you're used to. It's like she's asking you to show your character in front of people that, a bunch of people that you don't know, instead of a bunch of people that you do, your family, your friends, in all the environments that you're used to. You're all of a sudden in an environment where you're meant to directly do one specific thing, which in this case was, public speaking, and do that in front of people that have no idea who you are. And so you're kind of showing up raw, regardless of what you think about yourself, and just almost trying to prove that to people in a weird way. But it's hard because there's a talent in public speaking, and it's just, it wasn't necessarily easy to include tone and fluctuation in your voice in different ways when you're only ever kind of used to doing it one way. Like I don't think any of us were actors,
No. I mean, that's like a whole other philosophical conversation, because we're all actors in this life in some way or another. But, in that sense, it is really hard, because at the end of the day, like, what is it that you want to tell people about yourself? How do you want to come off? And if that's not something that you're thinking about on a daily, because you're not trying to sell your services or share something in particular, you're just like, yeah, I do this and I do that. And I don't know. I think I was just saying a bunch of random shit. Honestly, I was just like, yeah, I do all these random things. That's me.
Yeah, but I think it showed your ambition, and I think it showed your kindness and your openness. I think that's the weird part about it, or that's the good thing about it. And I have a side hobby of watching people and trying to figure out what exactly, like, how authentic they really are, because that has a lot to do with what I write about in the first place is individual authenticity. And I think it presented itself as that. Like it showed up as like this opportunity to see how real you were and see how real other people were, despite, trying to come off as professional or, charismatic or whatever. I think I'm charismatic until I'm around a circle and she's asking me to pump my fists and like speak with fire. And I have no idea what that means. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we did pretty good, but it
Yeah.
also goes to show like the kind of environment that we're used to. So in that group, we had what, maybe 30
Probably.
people?
Yeah.
Yeah. But in a smaller group, our personalities just kind of come out a bit more naturally, it
Hmm.
seems like. Yeah. And so you were able to stay connected with a few people in the class, right?
Yes. I mean, I've kind of come to terms with this in life itself. When you're kind of you're a extroverted person and you do like people, the way you handle those interactions kind of depends on your own insecurities and what and like your confidence in yourself. That's what I noticed is like as you internally transition from child to adult, you have to face these interactions, but you're also facing yourself at the same time. So it's like you have these connections with people and some of them work out and some of them don't. Sometimes it's just because another person is too scared to show up. Maybe it's you're too scared to show up. Or maybe there's just something, it's like, it's almost like a small heartbreak. It's like you don't understand why they don't like you and you don't really get an answer.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And that's just how life is. Like, we shouldn't be learning to try to impress everybody. We should be learning to try put an impression on the people that matter and the people that, show relativity, that show a same character, that show a same parallel path in life and values and stuff like that to hold hands with as you kind of move along. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I had a connect. Mostly, I've connected with you and one other, and I mean that's good enough for me. You take relationships as they are, and you allow them to end or expand as as naturally as you can.
Yeah. And it's true. I mean, the more and more I put myself out there and do a lot of different activities and hobbies, the more I can connect with the right people. Like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the times when you're initially starting off and you're putting yourself out there, you're just like, okay, let me be nice to everybody and this and that. But after a certain point, it's almost like you said, you learn to observe people and observe their actions, and you learn to almost like ask the right questions and feel people
Mm-hmm.
out a little more to see like, okay, are they really being genuine? Are they not? Like, how are they interacting with other people? And I've been able to like pick up like bullshit from people, and I'm like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
don't like. I always try to see the best in everybody, and I always want to like have love for everyone and be like, deep down, I know they're a good person, a good soul, and blah blah blah, and this is just how they are, but it's not the kind of person I want to associate myself with. And
Mm-hmm.
you eventually just migrate and you find the people that you genuinely connect with. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's great.
It's something that I was actually writing about yesterday, and if anybody's interested, like I'm a writer. I don't want to say a struggling writer. That's a bad way to put that. I'm an intentional writer. Like that's
Mhm.
where my life is headed. And I think people kind of get upset and frustrated with transition, especially when you start in the middle of life. But as a writer, I really am obsessed, almost to the point I break myself mentally in half sometimes, trying to figure out the things about human thought and the human condition and human behavior, and trying to philosophize something that people can attach to, that can give them value and help them find out what individual meaning means in a world where elite people are trying to force a particular meaning upon everybody. And I honestly think that's where most people end up suffering, is because they can't tell themselves apart from community. They can't see where they fit in community because they're all being told to follow the same rules and to follow the same dream, unfortunately. And that's where my writing goes a lot. And to speak to your last point, I was actually writing something yesterday about the character we grow up with isn't necessarily the one that we need to hold on to, because we've lived that character for so long that it's a perspective and a character trait outside of what we know that's important to maintain to maintain growth, to maintain progress. So for example, I'm very much my mother, I have a lot of feminine energy at my base, at my core. And, I do see the good in people, and I love that I see the good in people. I would rather see the good in people first before I see the bad. And, I want to be kind and I want to be compassionate. But at the same time, if I only live within those character traits, if I only live through that energy, I never learn my masculine. I never learn power. I never learn self-respect. I never learn to stand my ground. I never learn to be intimidating to the violent sources that are out in the world. To be a protector and provider and a guard. You know what I mean? And so I think it's important that we constantly try to understand who we are uniquely, but also expand ourselves in ways that we may not necessarily know are good for us. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely feel that. Sometimes my soul just gravitates towards certain things and I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I doing this? I'm terrified of it. It scares the shit out of me. And what is the point of this? And then after I go through it and just follow that random instinct, I end up just learning something more about myself, whether it's in the moment or after the fact. It's just part of life. Like, you just have to experience it in order to understand it yourself. I feel like a lot of people, back to your point about society telling you one thing and that's the only thing that you should believe in. And for me, I was always the one that was like, but why this and why that? And I want to go do this and da 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 da. And I used to have teachers or my parents or whoever just be like, no, like, do this, do what I told you to do. Don't ask questions and this and that. But, deep down, I was like, well, fuck you. I'm going to do it anyway. And then, I've allowed myself to grow in so many areas of my life and to meet so many other people who are branching out of those insecurities. And then in doing that, you find more of your authentic voice and what really resonates with you instead of just blindly following what is in front of you and what they present to you. You can think more creatively. And so with that, I mean, writing is like a very therapeutic and creative process. So when was it that you first started writing and what attracted you to writing?
See, and this'll go in hand with kind of what I was saying, what we were talking about before we started, is knowing that, maybe my creativity comes out in different ways than assumed, whether I assumed it or somebody else assumed it. I never did write. Like, I did well in English, but I was so obsessed with the couple things, with physical training, the building of the body, the molding of the body, and graphite art, things that, the expanding creativity that you can have through a pencil is endless. You know what I mean? And that's where my creativity really started. But I never journaled. I never had any sort of creative outlet that had to do with linguistics and the written art form. And it was only when I had a heartbreak at about 28 where I started to dive into not even writing yet. It was just me trying to understand more about myself. I was able to look back, because I think sometimes you can get so broken that you all of a sudden release any expectation of yourself in a way. Like, you're so lost that you allow anything else in. You maybe you question your beliefs, or you at least stop adhering to them so tightly because you're trying to understand what it was or why it was that you lost something that you had, and the hard part, I think, with a person is that when relationships end, it's always two parties that are included. And when that one ended, I had to figure out what it was that I was doing wrong. And so the first thing I did was actually, I started talking to people that could maybe give me wisdom. I started watching documentaries. I started reading self-help books, even though that's such a, overly used term, but life is self-improvement. So people can knock on self-improvement and books like that and, creative things like that all they want. But I started doing all that, and I started to kind of understand that I had to have a narrative with myself. I had to have I guess technically it'd be a dialogue, because it's me and this other voice. And this voice, you don't know you don't know where it came from. You don't know why it exists. You don't know why it's the critic. You don't know why it beats you up so badly and so roughly. I think that's part of the human condition, but I also think it's trauma. It's somebody else that told you who you are. And so I had to start understanding that voice. And so I didn't really know what else to do at the time than talk to people about it. And then when I figured out that I couldn't get anybody to be honest with me, which, people, we get too scared to hurt people's feelings. So when I couldn't really get what I needed from the people, when I could sense that they didn't want to give me something that might hurt who I am, I had to figure out on my own. Like, it was easier for me to face myself. And so I started creating phrases. I started, posting on social media things that I thought, and, looking for feedback. And it wasn't until probably I was 2 years later, 3 years later, maybe 30, 31, where I actually started to write in a form of script. I created a podcast, and I started scripting things out that I wanted to say, because at least if I put it out into the void, it was easier and relieved a pressure, that was being held inside, because I wasn't allowing it to be outside of me. I can only talk to myself so many times, and hear the same voice and the same things over and over again before it's no longer valuable. You know what I mean? And so I probably started the podcast roughly then, and then I actually really started getting into writing, whether it be, I created a blog, I created a newsletter, and I started journaling probably 3 or 4 years ago, maybe a year after the podcast started. I started really diving into it, and that's where I present my philosophies, and that's where I I really like to provoke people. It's the whole point of the podcast. It's called the Rebel Minded Podcast, and it's not violent. It's not aggressive. Like, I'm not.
You're an instigator too.
I'm a little bit of an instigator, but I do in a philosophical sense. An instigator knows
an instigator. I know.
Probably, yeah. And so, yeah, that's kind of the backstory. That's the foundation, the summary of why I started to do what I did.
Yeah. And so do you think that philosophy was something that really sparked up once you started writing and going through that self-discovery phase at that point? Or do you think you were interested in philosophy much earlier, but you were interested in it in a completely different manner, like never for yourself or about life, but just like, oh yeah, this is a very interesting thing, versus like, no, I'm going to use that for self-reflection?
Well, firstly, I'd like to admit that I was mostly a musclehead, and I was I was mostly on track with what normal people were doing, just living your life and doing a job and trying to get a pay raise and trying to buy a home and buy a car and all the things. And so I was in an ignorant bliss, and I understand now, being outside of that, why that's so comforting and why that's so addictive. Because I didn't understand what philosophy was. Like, I had heard philosophy, I had heard philosophical, I had heard stoicism, but I had never tried to define what that was. And that wasn't the first thing that I reached out to be honest. I was just looking for information. I became obsessed with trying to figure out why I was the way that I was and how I could fix it. How I could fix my anxiety, how I could take away my stress, how I could see life in a new light, even when it's hard, and that's a constant process. And what I kind of figured out was that philosophy is very undervalued, but it's done most of the time by most people that decide to think for themselves. Everyone kind of has a life philosophy. It's your beliefs about why you do what you do, whether it's something that you are intentional about, or whether it's kind of loosely habitual. You just may not understand it. I mean, and the more you understand yourself, and maybe the more you understand a philosophy of your life, the more you're capable of structuring your life, and the more you're capable of actually becoming efficient in what you do. And so philosophy, in my opinion, is just necessary. It's just necessary to the people that actually want to grow. You have to build something that makes sense to you, and you have to do that. You have to ask questions, and philosophy is based around the questions. And to go a little bit deeper, the more strict side of that is Stoicism, and Stoicism is based on the separation of emotions from thought itself, from the mind, to help make you less impulsive and more intentional, and to help you become more rational, and to understand what it is about life that is getting in your way, so that you can set the things aside that are taking you in a downward spiral and actually project yourself forward, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I started reading philosophy probably. I attached myself to this guy, Ryan Holiday, and I've loosely followed him since then. I've got his books, and I've got all of the things, and there's a list of 100 books that I have to read, but regardless, I think it's important for everybody, maybe not to base their life off of philosophy, but find a basic philosophy in which they want to live by. What they want their lifestyle to be, what they want their values to be, what their ambition is pushing them towards. That's a basic philosophy that everybody, I think, kind of already does, but just doesn't define it.
Yeah. I mean, and even just defining what a value is to a person. I know I had a difficulty with just being like, okay, but how do I even separate my goals and dreams from my values, or how do they tie in? And what are the false values that I have within myself that I need to cut out? Because I feel like I'm living by this way, but is it really doing well for me? Does having the big house with the big picket fence and, living that American dream really the way that I want to go? And even just destroying some of those, I guess, dreams or values around what I want my life to look forward, how I want it to look moving forward. Like there's a lot of that's like really hard for me to do, to be like, wow, I have to give up that perspective, because in reality, it is kind of like a Disney fairy tale. It's not real, and I can actually construct my reality the way that I want to. I can actually change it to how I want, and I don't need to follow what everybody else is doing. And so it is a really challenging point for people to get into once they start questioning what their values are and defining what their philosophies are, and even the kind of philosophy that they would be into. Like I follow a little bit of Stoicism, and I've gone down the rabbit hole through a bunch of different philosophers, and I pick up bits and pieces here and there, and I take what resonates with me, and I'll take what challenges me as well. If I read something and I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I like that. It's like, okay, but why don't I like it? And then it's like you start going down that rabbit hole. But I mean, so when you start getting into philosophy, how had that influenced your previous life? So for example, you were into bodybuilding. Like that's a whole other thing. Like what even got you into that, and how did philosophy impact your journey in bodybuilding?
Well, the crazy part is my body has transitioned so much between the ages of like 15 and now. 2 decades, and I've done amazing things. Physically, some things that I'm proud of, things that, because of the way that I am now I look back and I'm not just proud of myself, but impressed. Like, and what I think we all start at a basic idea of what life is about, and it's it's susceptible to naivety for sure. It goes back to that ignorant bliss idea. But bodybuilding was something that kind of saved me in a way, and so did powerlifting. That's the next sport that I got into, for two different reasons. But I was just obsessed. I knew that somehow, being the small structure that I am, I stand about 5'3". I think I graduated 138 pounds. And for some reason, it just made sense. And I think that that's something that people really need to pay attention to and need to attach to is when something makes sense, regardless of why it makes sense. I knew that I could expand myself. I knew that the body would grow. Do I know why at 15? I didn't know anything about nutrition. I didn't know anything about even physical training, really. I had just listened to my coaches, and I saw the results happen. And that's kind of like going back to what I was saying about having a philosophy about life and not even understanding what that is. I just knew that there was value and growth in this, even if it just was as basic and vain as, me finding a partner, somebody that was, if me becoming lustful was the idea. And I, there were so many things to it. Like, I did feel really good about myself. I was so obsessed. Like, I spent 6 days in the gym a week. I spent 150, $200 a month in supplements, most stuff that I didn't need. And, but through that process, I really learned the basics of training, the foundations of training. I learned basic nutrition, things that people just don't understand that I've never done it. And I didn't really understand what a philosophy based around something like physical training and the importance of physical training, what that really meant until I was in my 30s. It's that value system. It's knowing that the human condition is changed by the way that you use your biological self. That to be without that means that it's going to change your mentality. It's going to change your clarity. It's going to be very confusing without any sort of physical training. So I also push that. But I guess, what was the original question? Like, what was the basis of philosophy in bodybuilding, or what got me into bodybuilding?
It was a combination of a bunch of things.
Yeah.
I figured I'd just wrap a bunch of shit up and you'd figure it out. But
well, I rant a lot, but yeah, I mean, I think at a point we can kind of narrow it down to trying to figure out why we think what we do, and being able to not just reject the things that disturb us and the things that we don't agree with and the things that we're uncomfortable with. I think that's the basis of philosophy. When it comes to something like physical training, say bodybuilding or powerlifting or something like that, you learn that there's things that you don't want to do, whether it be because you're insecure about it. Maybe you think that it's something that you don't need. Bodybuilding itself is all about symmetry, and powerlifting is all about getting the body to work as one piece. And so if you don't have balance in either one of those sports, then you're lacking, and you can't be the most ideal competitor in that sense, because you're unable to see the things that you don't like about training, and you can't get yourself to do them anyways, because you don't like them, just because they're uncomfortable. And I think that's the greatest part about the values of those competition style types of training is you find yourself being resilient, and you find yourself pushing yourself through things that must be done in order to be the best version. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's overflowed into other areas of your life? Like, for example, with writing, like, do you think that the fact that you have trained so much in powerlifting and weight training, that it's that resilience, that continuity in action and building that habit, do you think that that's helped you translate that over into your writing to continue to build a habit into doing it frequently versus just being like, I'll just write every once in a while?
Yes, for sure. But I won't tell people that it was easy, because you become the best at something when you've done it repeatedly for years. You know, they have that 10,000 hour rule. You know, it's maybe not when you necessarily perfect it, but it's, you've done it well enough that you know what's necessary to do that thing. And, you know, if I was bodybuilding all the way through my 20s, 6 days a week, 2 hours in the gym, that time racks up insanely fast. And the only problem that I had, and, you know, this, I could have an obscure, you know, sense of this just because, you know, it's very easy to look out in social media and see how everyone else does things flawlessly. But every time I've transitioned into something new, I've struggled hard. I've got a tendency to freeze and basically proverbially how do you say that word?
Proverbially.
Proverbially.
I know what you're saying.
Metaphorically, to curl up in a corner and just and just freeze. That's happened every time I've transitioned. But the thing that's gotten me up and moving is the very fact that knowing repetition is what gains momentum, and it is the thing that builds your confidence, and it is the thing that makes you what it is that you're stating that you are. So, you know, I'm a writer as soon as I decide to write. It doesn't matter whether I've had a book or not. It doesn't matter whether I was actually, you know, if I was actually on a powerlifting platform or not. Like, once you do the action, that's what you become. But you become more of that thing when you do it more repeatedly. And to do it more repeatedly, you have to also do it when you don't want to do it. Mm-hmm. Because you're trying to attain something. You're trying to put value not just into your own life, but you're trying to put value out into the world. Something that all of us have to consider when we choose a lifestyle, when we choose a direction. We have to really make sense of what value means to us and whether it's going to include other people or not. And I think in every way, when we start directing ourselves towards something that we're curious about or passionate about, we eventually do create some sort of product or service naturally that is valuable to other people. And that's how we stay a part of the tribe, in my opinion. So yeah, there's definitely direct connections. It's just, for me, it wasn't so easy to see. Like I bobbled intensely, repeatedly, every time I've transitioned into something. And I just think it's important for people to know that, because I think that there's people that are going to go through that same thing. Mm-hmm. They're going to have a hard time transitioning. And I want people to know that the darkness that lies in between is, it's never a barrier. It's just a door, and you have to find the right key.
Yeah. And it's so true, because with social media, we're always posting the best things. This is where I am now after, you know, having done something for so long. You only want to really show the best. But the thing is, those little moments, they've all accumulated to that best portrayal in social media, you know? And sometimes that could be very discouraging for people. I know, like, every time that I go into a new hobby or activity, I just naturally gravitate towards, like, observing my instructors, because they obviously have a lot of knowledge that they're trying to share with us. Like, if they know enough to teach, it's like, yeah, I really want to observe them and connect with them and understand what they've been through, because I find that sometimes understanding their journey, like, fuels something in me. It allows me to open up my mind and be like, okay, if they went through that, then I'll probably go through something similar. Or, mm-hmm. Oh yeah, now that's validating what I am currently going through. But it is scary. Every time I do something new, I'm exactly like you, you know, I'm always like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't understand. Like, man, like I don't compare to these people. And I don't know that I'll ever be at their level, and oh, I look like an idiot doing this or that. And I mean, even on this podcast, like you see me, I can barely talk sometimes or make sentences, but I'm still doing it. You know, at the end of the day, it's like, whatever, who cares? But there's something about it that it's like, yeah, you just have to stick to it, and you just have to keep taking one step after the other, regardless of how you're feeling that day. And there have been plenty of times where I'm like, man, I really don't feel like going, and I'm going to take the day off. And then when I push myself to actually go and do the thing, I'm like, man, all right, I'm glad I did that. Like that was good. That was progress. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time to find that routine. I think that's the other thing for me too, is I'll get excited and I'll want to dive into something right away, and I'll jump in the water. And then I'm like, okay, I got to get out a little bit. And then I kind of ease myself back into it. And then I'll go in and out. And then until I find a better flow, it's like, okay, yes, I know I'm going to struggle with this, or I got to focus on that, but it's going to be okay. I feel like I'm all right. But I don't think a lot of people realize that when they're making transitions. I think they feel like they have to be perfect the first go around, or it's not meant to be, so to speak.
Exactly that. I really do think it's exactly that, because I would say that I'm the most insecure person that I know. Obviously, I can't be in the minds of other people, but I'm more insecure than anybody I know. I berate myself so much for so many things, and I think that that one of the biggest things that people need to understand, I mean, I don't know who said it, but it's one of those super cliche popular quotes, is like, comparison is the thief of joy. And it definitely makes sense, because when you turn your head away from comparison, when you look to your past and just realize that you're better than you were last week, and you're better than your day before, or even if you weren't, even if you've fallen off, the comparison is that you learned a lesson there. And people think that lessons come in these big, expansive explosions, all at once. And then all of a sudden, you're free, but it's not. Lessons beat you over and over and over again, until it hurts enough that you actually gain some sort of action, or you gain some sort of momentum. And I think the really hard part about the human experience and us having connection to everyone so easily is that one of my favorite people in the world, his name's Jordan Peterson. A lot of people have heard about him. A lot of people have opinions about him, but he basically says in his books that life is suffering. In one of his books, particular, 12 Rules for Life, and it's very true. It's just that people want to reject that because it sounds so nihilistic. It sounds very, very painful. But the truth about that, in my opinion, is that life is suffering because that's the only way to get to meaning. That's the only way to actually get to value. The subjective view that we've put ourselves in is that efficiency and what's the right word here I'm looking for? When you get things basically right away, like convenience. When you get those things, people are starting to attach themselves to impulse. They're attaching themselves to the dopamine bump. Like you're psychologically, chemically having reactions of dopamine because of all of these things, be it our food, be it our social media, whatever it is that's going on in life, even the terror style things, the tyrannical things that are going on in the world. Like it creates some sort of emotion that, is impulsive. And that's kind of how the world has become. But if all of us could shut off social media for a week and like just have the conversations with ourselves and the people that are closest to us, I think we'd realize how much anxiety we'd really have to let go of. And I think we'd realize how important it is to focus on a problem, because the best part of life is getting through it. Not running away from it. Like hedonism is something that bothers me, to a great extent. And, I think it's when we take anything to an extreme that it becomes a problem. It becomes an ideology, and it becomes void of perspective. and it becomes this thing that makes you an ignorant human to anybody else that lies outside your belief. And we get tribal, and we attach ourselves to this dichotomous thinking rather than understanding that it's a spectrum. But life is suffering is it doesn't get more true than that. It's, I don't know, it's a motivation to me to figure out how to suffer less with some sort of purpose, with some sort of idea of how you want to live your life beyond the consumerist style of things. If you can get past having value just in what money can buy you, then you can find value in things that make your heart feel good, that make you feel connected to other people, that make you love and provide compassion and understanding and support for what really matters, which is other people.
And do you think you're doing that on your podcast?
Most of the time, no. Just because I think, this is me being critical. We were talking earlier about the version of myself that needs to be more masculine. My podcast is my chance to practice that. That's why I titled it the way that I did. And that's why, I've defined it as, this ability to provoke people, because not only do I think it's important to get us to actually have debate, healthy debate, and actually learn how to question, but it's also important for me because I'm trying to embrace a style of character that I'm not used to. I'm trying to push myself in a way that makes sense. But because that's not who I am starting from childhood, that also means that it feels super uncomfortable and it feels gross and it feels like I'm hurting people's feelings. When, I've had a couple people come to me honestly and say like, bro, like you're not even trying hard. Like nobody's pissed off, don't worry about it. But despite the title of my podcast, I want people to be rebel-minded individuals. That's the whole idea, is to get people to think for themselves, to question themselves, to provoke themselves, and figure out who they are. Because I think a strong individual creates a strong society, creates a strong global system.
Mm-hmm. And has anybody come to you and suggested that you do your podcast in a different way? And how much so that's question number one. And then two is, how much has your listeners really influenced the way that you do your podcast? Because, once you start diving into these artistic forms of expression, some people, they end up, it's like a lot of musicians nowadays. Like I love connecting to musicians when they're kind of in the underground and they have their style. And then as soon as they get signed by some major record label, they start going very poppy and generic and things like that. So, I mean, has the way that you presented your podcast changed in any way because of what listeners have said to you or what they maybe have requested of you?
Yeah, I do try to listen, and I also I'll be a hypocrite because I also reject, because I'm like, this is my fucking podcast. Don't tell me how to do it.
This is mine.
Yeah. But I also think that it's important to have those, to constantly ask for feedback, to see where you reject things, to see where you agree with things, to see where you might have a confirmation bias. Because what you're trying to do is find relativity. You're trying to find your community. And I'm at roughly 136 episodes now. So it's still pretty new, but what people have told me has showed me that I have to find even more of an authentic expression than I felt like that I already had. Really? I think because of like social media, we try to be so perfect in how we do everything that we're afraid to be authentic and to ask questions and to be insecure and all these things, because we want we want to go from 0 to 100. We want people to notice, and we think that formality, and we think the professionalism, even though they are great things, we expect to have them dialed in like that, and it just doesn't work that way. And my podcast has changed a lot, and I've floundered a lot with my podcast. So I've tried to figure out, is this more about me? Is this more about having a conversation with myself, or is this more about other people? And I've gone back and forth with interviews, trying to figure out what works best for my audience. And it's been mixed reviews, and I take it basically as I can. I've had people tell me, hey, like, I'd really love to have you do more interviews because I like to hear you interact. But because, when you go off on your own, like, you become too abstract and I can't really make sense of what's going on. And, I've had other people say, hey, like, your solo episode allowed me to just, expand on myself, and it allowed me to question myself, in the way that you're asking me to, so that I can figure out who I am. And so it's still hard. It takes so long to build a community that makes sense to you, that it's clear that you connect with, that it almost doesn't matter. The clarity doesn't matter as much as the expansion to clarity, if that makes sense. Like the journey to that position. What is the Rebel Minded podcast going to be at 200 episodes, at 500 episodes, at 1,000 episodes? I think the biggest thing is making sure that you don't quit, in order to figure out what it is that thing is even supposed to be. Maybe it continuously progresses. Isn't that life right there? Like a continuation, an expansion constantly, the fucking universe that I still can't understand. Like, how is it limitless? Like, what lies? I don't know. It folds in itself or something like that. It still doesn't make sense. But yeah, it's still growing, and I still have a lot to do. But until I get a direct quote from the people, the quote unquote people that tell me, hey, this is wrong, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And I like to be philosophical, and I like to poke the bear a little bit, or the bunny, depends on who you are. And just try to get people to think for themselves. I just want people to think for themselves.
Well, does it matter if people even tell you, like, yeah, that's wrong? Does it matter?
It doesn't. It doesn't. I think it goes back to what we're talking about with extremes. The easiest, and I don't want to drop into this too heavy because it's just so exhausting. But if you take the political standings of Democrat and Republican, any extreme is ignorant, because it's refusing to listen to the opposite side, and that's it's refusing to actually acknowledge what the definition of democracy is, which is a spectrum, which is debate and discussion to find compromise. Like, that's what democracy is. But when we're in a dichotomy like that, it doesn't allow for anything to expand beyond one position. Like, there's no swing of the pendulum, So I think as long, I will do what I want to do, as long as I don't find myself at an extreme. And so I think that's why I base it around philosophy and questions, is because I can say pretty much whatever I want, and you can be pissed off about it, and you can disagree with it, and it's all going to come down to your subjective idea of what life is. It may be a way of, like, keeping myself safe. Like, I don't have to choose a side. Mm-hmm. In philosophy, you don't really choose a side. Like, you question it all. You question everything.
Yeah.
So, more or less, yeah, I guess I don't give a fuck.
And so, at this point in your life, how open are you to actually changing your mind? Like, have you ever filmed an episode and then all of a sudden you were like, I'm going to film another episode, but now I actually have this stance on what I had previously talked about?
There's two lessons that I learned. And I don't even know how they came to be, but there's two lessons that I learned that became really important. One was to take responsibility for everything, even if it seems like it's the world's fault. Because when you take responsibility, then you also take the power to be able to change it. And the second lesson is to always be open-minded, or to always assume that you can be open-minded, because no matter what your discussions, no matter what your discussions create, like, you're going to find yourself in a corner regardless, because of the people that you're going to interact with, because you're going to be emotional with the people that you talk to, and you're going to find yourself on two different ends of a field and not know what to do about it, and you can't really find a way in the middle. And so I guess it would depend on whether I'm willing to find myself on a dichotomous situation. If I find myself in an extreme, if somebody can pin me down and show me that I'm too one-sided, then I think I'll listen. But I'm pretty fucking stubborn. I'm pretty obnoxious.
Maybe that's what we have to change.
Maybe. I mean, you tell me right now. You if you see me being, but that's the best part about being open-minded, is like, you want people to call you out because you figure out that those are the people that you want to be around. You want people to be that honest with you.
And so how do you draw the line between honesty and just criticism? Ooh. Like, for you, how do you define that? Like, is this person actually being honest, or are they just criticizing me because of whatever ulterior motives they may have?
I think what I found, especially because I'll listen to myself, is, I mean, there's the term constructive criticism, right? The thing that we're supposed to seek, that we're supposed to look for. But I think if there's a negative criticism, and knowing the difference between that criticism and honesty, I think it really comes down to how emotional somebody is when they're giving it to you. How sure they are that you're fucked up. I think honesty comes with compassion. I think honesty comes with the ability to allow somebody to be fucked up. You present information, and you allow them to stay with that or change it for themselves. I think that's what real honesty is. And I think real honesty has to do with wanting to see them grow regardless of the direction of that growth. Like, making sure that if I'm being honest with you, that my honesty isn't in a way to influence you to go the direction that makes sense to me, to agree with me. It's kind of similar to that constant misunderstanding between the male and female brain. I've given like logical solutions to past girlfriends and been like, I don't understand why you don't want to fix this. Like, I'm presenting it, right here, when it has nothing to do with the solution. It has everything to do with understanding the struggle that somebody's going through and allowing them to make the choice for themselves, and being there for support, not being there with the answer. I really think it comes down to how compassionate and understanding we are with each other.
Yeah. I think once you start developing more compassion, you begin to open up to different ways of communicating and understanding and learning the other individual's way of receiving information and understanding the information. I mean, that's something that I'm still trying to figure out. The more that I talk to people, the more that I grow and learn about myself, is I may have a perspective in this way, and I want to share that with somebody. But sometimes I have to use different types of analogies to really get a point across, because I know I can randomly go off on a tangent and it could be very abstract. And I've seen people look at me and be like, the fuck is she talking about right now? And I'm like, okay, let me give you another example. It's like this, and it's like doing this. And they're like, oh, I get it. And I'm like, right, I gotta like take it a step back and realize what is this individual's best form of communication? What is this individual's best way to receive information? I mean, as I'm saying that right now, I'm thinking about love languages. I don't think a lot of people have really gotten into that. And I think it would help them significantly with understanding how it is that they receive love, how it is that they define love, how it is that they give love. And then with their partner, the same thing, because there's a lot of people who are in relationships who constantly struggle and they're like, oh, well, he's not, buying me this or that. So he obviously doesn't love me. But on his end, he's like, well, I'm mowing the lawn and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It's acts of service versus like gift giving. And those are two different love languages. And then it's the same thing. It's sometimes you're so used to your own form of communication that when you give it to another person and it's not received, you're just like, well, why not? I thought this was the best way to communicate and to be myself. And it's like, no, we have to realize that we have to learn from each other and with each other in order to really connect and stay connected. So it does involve a lot of growth and just a lot of back and forth to figure out the best ways to do that. But yeah, we have to just remember there are different ways of communicating. And so, I mean, that kind of ties into your writing and then podcasting. Those are two different forms of expression. And I'm sure that you're expressing different ideas and different things in each of those facets as well. I know that when I write, I'm able to sit down and just write much more eloquently than I am with speaking. Speaking is still something that I'm very much still trying to balance out. I have that professional side of me that's like, oh, I gotta speak like this and to sound very clean and precise. But then there's the other part of me that's like, fuck it, I just want to talk like this and like it just has a little more of my authentic voice that, hey, like I grew up with Spanish and English and I grew up in the city where it's like, I was raised with like rap and hip hop. And so some of those influences are still within me, but I know that I've had to repress a lot of that voice because I've had to step into this other role in my professional career. So it's like, I can't talk in this way. So I think for me personally, I'm at that point where it's like, okay, I'm just kind of trying to find a balance between the two. But it just seems like a lot of people are stuck between these different voices, or they're only stuck in one voice.
Yeah, no, I actually think that's insanely important. It comes back to philosophy and self-discussion, is because the only thing that's going to change that voice is you. People can go through some really dark stuff and they just endure it.
Yeah.
And because they believe the voice that tells them who they are. And it super sucks, because a lot of us think of it in this big bang kind of way of thinking, or at least I have. I'm like, does life have to hit me that hard for me to wake up?
Yes.
And,
I mean, sometimes.
Dude, I feel like I've gotten hit in the head with a proverbial brick so many times. Yeah. And it's like the bruise keeps growing and I just don't get it, But, I can also say like all the suffering is worth it when I look back to when I was 25 and the difference between then and now, a decade later. Like, that person was totally different. That person, 25-year-old me, enjoyed the shit out of stuff. And that's that pendulum swing that I was talking about, is like when I started taking things more seriously about my life goals and my direction and trying to create some sort of value, I got overly serious. I kind of hit this middle where I was like, oh, okay, ambitious me, and, getting things done, and, finding what little things don't matter and including the things that do. And, you know, at this point now I'm realizing, oh shit, like I've stopped enjoying my life. I've stopped having hobbies. I've stopped having interests because I'm so obsessed with this idea and this projection. And I think it's a constant movement, but some people don't know how to even create any sort of gravitational pull, or, you know, to create some sort of momentum, you know? And it can get really hard because it's so intimidating. And when you decide to adventure out into your life, I think that it's not figuring out what it is that you want to do with your life that's hard. It's figuring out how to be resilient enough to find it. You know, to be able to really endure it, because it includes a lot of isolation. It includes a lot of darkness. It includes a lot of doubt. It includes a lot of questioning about identity. And it's so easy to get caught up in the people that we've grown up with and the things that we've grown up doing, that as adults, it's like the most insanely difficult thing to make a transition, even though, you know, if we're going to define adult, isn't that adult in itself is like taking responsibility and directing your path? And so many people are afraid to do that. You know, look at all the like boy men or man child males that are out here. Like
there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them.
Well,
there's
it definitely, like, you know? in certain industries and things like that. And yeah, I've seen them. I mean, but there's we can't talk shit on the men, like the women.
Oh, I'm a man, so I can for sure. But
I mean, like, we all have
all
growing
people
to do. It's everybody. Yes. Yeah. In our own ways. I mean, and that was really interesting because I think I was doing like a solo recording, or I might have done like a little vlog video. I like to just record myself when I have ideas on my phone. And I came up with that idea of, in our lives, we're so used to monitoring our physical development and our growth within those different stages.
The external.
It seems like we've been able to monitor that to be like, yeah, this is a baby, infant, adolescent, young adult, senior. But the emotional and the spiritual sides haven't been able to keep up in that regard. It seems like because nobody has really mastered how to deal with emotions or integrating spirituality and growth and connection and healing and all of that at an earlier stage, so many people are stunted in their emotional growth and their spiritual growth that it's almost like not until they get into like their senior era, or maybe even into late adulthood, that all of a sudden it's like their emotional levels just hop up and try to catch up. And at that point, that's why everybody's having like midlife crises, and they're like, yeah, I used to be like this when I was younger, and and all of a sudden they are able to let go. Versus, you know, if we were to train everything from the very beginning, it's like we can pull up these emotional levels and these spiritual levels along with our physical levels, and we can be on the same page and grow in that regard. It's really interesting to see, but I feel like a lot of people are still kind of struggling with that. I mean, same here. Like, I'm not saying I'm there yet, but it's just really interesting to see how our past and traumas can really stunt certain areas of our growth.
Well, it's something that I kind of have a theory on, because I think that, I mean, emotions are part of us regardless. And the way that I define feelings is it's the cross section between emotions and thoughts. And that's how we feel about our lives. But you're right. You know, if we don't learn any sort of emotional intelligence, the thing that is primally, like, biologically part of us, then it will get us to sway in whatever direction they want. And whatever emotions that you grew up with feeling the most are probably going to be the emotions that you live your life by. You know, all of us would want for it to be joy. You know, that doesn't happen very often. You know, a lot of times we have feelings that come out violently, or that come out in anger, or that come out in sadness and sorrow. You know, and it shows up in our actions. And I think that I agree with you. Like it would make such a difference if we learned emotional intelligence, and we learn insecurities, and we learn self-development at an age when they're highest, so that we can learn what to do with those things and how to rationalize life and project ourselves in a direction that actually matters. You know, the people that I'm most jealous of in life, or that I love, that I love who they are, but I'm jealous of, are the people that found some sort of path that they were so obsessed with that no one could sway them. You know, out of all the people that do something that they don't want to do and try to fake it, and follow money in order to make them feel okay, you know, food or toys or whatever it is about life, you know, I don't think that there's one NFL player or track star or soccer player that lives their life fake because they don't actually love what they do, you know, or some sort of creative, you know, some sort of artist, some sort of intellectual, some sort of scientist. These people don't get into things because they're just trying to get toys. They're trying to understand something about life, and they're trying to, you know, make a goal that is so ambitious that nobody else can understand. You know, they attach themselves to these things authentically, and they're the most real people, I think. You know, the people that don't take no for an answer, and the people that won't let anyone or anything stand in their way. And it doesn't mean that they're perfect. It doesn't mean that they're highly, you know, the most emotionally intelligent or anything. But I think that individuals are so gifted. And I think that it's a combination of genetics and nurturing that creates your soul. And your soul, to me, is what you want to do with your life. It's telling you, it's whispering to you what it wants you to pursue. You know, and the hard thing is answering it, is understanding it, and actually taking action to follow it and do it correctly. You know, but if we had a way to teach young people about all these things that matter internally, maybe they wouldn't attach themselves so obnoxiously to the external. You know, and know that the external is just a byproduct of the internal progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think our entire school system just needs a total revamp, honestly, in what it is that we're teaching. There's so many, individuals that are completely stunted in what they could be because the educational system has failed them. And I feel like I can say the educational system has failed more people than not. And there are going to be some people who are like, well, my education system didn't fail me. Well, it's like, well, congratulations. But majority of the people in the world, unfortunately, the education system fails. And I think like we need to just incorporate more life skills within the educational system. Like, yeah, you can learn all these facts and all this stuff, but where you have to understand creativity, you know, critical thinking, you have to allow for abstract thinking, you have to allow for people to understand their bodies like completely. I think that's another huge disconnect, and why there's so many issues with health and nutrition, because we're not even taught about our own bodies properly and how to maintain that. And a lot of the times people are shunned or told to be quiet about certain things because it's like, oh, no, don't talk about that.
Within the system.
Exactly. And it's just like, no, don't talk about that. You know what? Like, just be quiet about it. And so people are not going to open up and be like, hey, I have this question about my body, or I have this question about my health and this and that, until it gets to a point where it's too late. And now they're stuck on medications, or it's grown into some type of debilitating disease. And I feel like that is exactly what's happening with our own minds and with our emotions, is that we're getting to that point where it's like, okay, there's a lot of people that are suffering from this thing, but there's so much stigma around self-help and the mind and psychology and balancing your emotions that people are afraid to speak up and say, I have anxiety, or I have depression, or I have these, these different voices in my head, or I have like this anxiety about blah, 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 because they're going to be seen as less than. And the thing is, like, our brain is part of our body. We should learn to take care of it. To your point about bodybuilding and really diving into nutrition and understanding how the body works and really optimizing it, as you're saying that, I'm like, that's self-help. You are learning how to properly take care of your individual self. So why is it that we can say, oh yeah, you going to the bookstore and going to the self-help section, why is it only based on the mental or the emotional? Nutrition, working out, expanding on other facets of who we are. It's all self-help. Like, it's all like personal development and self-discovery. We are helping ourselves. So why should we have a stigma against just our mind and our brain? Our brain is literally a part of our body. It is an organ in our body. And that's always just been an issue with me, is people always stigmatizing mental health issues. And it's like, the reason there are mental health issues is because we keep stigmatizing it and we keep treating it as less than, and we keep ignoring the brain. And the brain is what really gets us going every single day. So why not treat it like any other organ within our body?
No, I completely agree. And to start where you started, the education system, I see it as very limiting, because it's only I'm going to make a rough abstract percent that it's not even statistics. So don't attach yourself to this, but it's okay. Like, the education system is so limiting that it's probably only providing for 10% of the kids that go through it, because it only bases education off of one type of intelligence. And there's multiple intelligences, by the way. And there's a book that talks about 7 different types of intelligence. But what I mean is that, the education system is structured for industry, and it gives us a basis to start with, but it doesn't actually educate anybody in creativity or uniqueness or any of these different 7 types of intelligence. And so the education itself may be some sort of basic foundation, but it's also lacking, quite a bit. And the 10% that actually get anything from it are the people that we definitely need structured, logical education systems for, doctors, engineers, scientists. Like, those people need to have education based off of our historical failures and successes to understand how their jobs work. Like, I'm not going to go to a doctor that's been operating on lizards and cats his whole life and never actually got a medical degree to put me back together. Like, that's just not going to happen. Like, you go to a doctor that's got a PhD or, like a doctorate, whatever. I'm horrible with the steps of education, but yeah, it only works for a small amount of people, and it just kind of super sucks.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what's so important about creating community and then just following. I mean, that's the whole reason I wanted to do this podcast, is to just get people to think and to hear other people's stories and to say like, oh, I resonate with that person's story, or they went through something that I went through, or maybe something that's said kind of wakes them up a little bit. And they're like, oh, that hit me. That kind of like, that made me uncomfortable. Why? Why is that making me uncomfortable? Oh shit, because that is my reality right now. So what am I going to do about it? And for them to realize that, hey, you don't have to be a celebrity to make big moves or changes in your life. I think it's great that we can connect with celebrities and hear their stories and this and that, but so many of us are disconnected from that. we need to realize that, hey, there's a lot of people that are just on the same page as us, that are on the same level as us, and they are taking the steps to, better themselves and to break out of the darkness that they're in. And, it just, I always tell people, like, you're not alone in your life. Like, you're not alone in your journey. You're not alone in your suffering. It may feel like that because you're in a dark place and you can't find the light. Even though you're looking, there's darkness all around you. But guess what? There's other people that are also in the dark. And it's just that we're so encapsulated in where we are that we've completely muted everybody else. And we're not just being like, Caw, is anybody else in here? Anybody else around? Anybody else kind of struggling with this? So yeah, we're not alone, like I've been through those really dark places in life, moments where I've even questioned life multiple times, and like I've put action to some of that, and luckily that voice, that soul inside me was like, no, like drew the line and got me out of that. But it's very hard when you're in there. And so I hope that anybody that's listening and going through that experience right now, just keep holding on. Just take it one more day. And there will be a light. There is a light. I promise. It's you got to lift your head up. You got to lift your head up and look around. Start moving around.
Well, yeah. The darkness is a thing that just is unavoidable, and it's crazy how dark darkness can get. Yeah. But the inspirational thing about it is that everyone that's alive has a soul that wants to do something, or else they would have given up already. Even if people are doing things that they don't want to do, the only reason they continue to do them is because they have hope. People that are in jobs that they don't like, that's the biggest thing right there. People are just suffering through trying to understand, how to find happiness. And the only reason they're capable of continuing to do that is because they have hope. It may be an abstract hope. It may be a hope that they don't understand, but the soul keeps you going. It's looking for something to come out of the woodwork. And my problem from childhood was I knew that I had something. I was, people, were talking to me when people had, gave me props about certain things. And I had some sort of spark of a belief, but I assumed that the world would find me. And so I left it up to the world to act on what I had not created for myself, And the shitty part is that I think that's how a lot of people feel when they don't know where they want to go, is they just hope that somebody will see them, and someone will see, their value. Someone will see their gifts. But the whole part of action and inclusion and presentation of yourself out in the world is you defining what that is and giving people the chance to see you, regardless of how big your audience is, And so I think the sickness in a social sense, why there's so many people kind of quote unquote in that middle where they don't know what to do with themselves, is just because that they haven't been able to figure themselves out yet. And they haven't given themselves the opportunity to try anything because it's super fucking scary. But that's the spark. That's the soul. Everyone has it, or else they would have given up a long time ago. It's just everybody has. The human flaw is corruption and power, or absolute power, whatever that term is. And
I know, right? How do you define
you've had a veil
that?
put over your eyes.
Yeah.
But the crazy part is, like, as an individual person, you have so much power to rip that thing to the side, you know, and to find your way through, because no one can actually trick you more than you trick yourself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so once you start to expand and once you start to decide things, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and doesn't mean that you're going to gain everything that you ever wanted, but you'll gain power, and you'll gain ability, and you'll take control of your life. And that's kind of how I see people. Like, that goes back to that whole mother connection that I have, is like, she sees a purity in people, and she sees a soul in everyone. And I think that she passed that on to me, and that's the hope that I have for humanity right there.
Yeah. And we need more people to tap into that hope, because there's like a fine line between hope and hopelessness.
Yes, there is.
And helplessness. Actually, that's another one too, because I know I'm like, I teeter on that a lot. I see a lot of the things that are wrong in society and a lot of the different areas that need help. And sometimes it's just like, where do I even start? You know, like I could go over here, I could go over here, but then I would drive myself crazy. And a lot of people don't realize that, yeah, you know, that, again, kind of cliche to say it, but it's like, look in the mirror. Michael Jackson said it, like, look in the mirror, you know, start with yourself. Because as you start to heal yourself and you start to connect with yourself, you understand what's actually important to you and what really resonates with you. And something I have been doing a lot, and really try to encourage people to do as well, is the more that you get to connect with yourself and heal yourself and just understand like what you want, what you value in life, you learn to give back. You know, like I get involved with a lot of like nonprofit work, charity, volunteering, and this and that, because I realize like, hey, these are efforts that I genuinely care about. And in doing that, I give back and I connect to other individuals who also care about that cause. And again, you're building that community, you're building growth, and you're supporting something in some way. So for people who are like, but I don't have money to do this and that. And it's like, time is your currency. And the way that you invest your time is how, you know, you'll grow that currency and how you'll grow as an individual. But I always say, just like sit down and just volunteer, start giving back. You know, if you care about the environment, start volunteering for the environment. If you're into sports and stuff, maybe start coaching a team and help kids get through whatever they have to go through. I mean, a lot of people don't realize it, but teachers and coaches are really like second parents for a lot of kids. They spend a lot of time with their teachers and parents, and yet they're so undervalued. And we need really good people to step into those roles and be the mentors that they never had. Or, you know, for some of them, maybe they did have really good mentors, but then it's about sharing what it is that they've learned and knowing that somebody else can benefit from it.
Yeah, I think selflessness, you know, the ability to provide service is so it's so artificially defined, you know, because people are so exhausted by their lives. They're like, you know, I don't have time or energy to even do that. But the most basic form of it is that whatever it is that you're doing right now is already a service, except you're just getting paid for it. Like, your job is just a transaction. And whether you like it or not, you know, whether you like your job or not, like, you're already doing a service, you know? So everybody, unless they're, you know, a kid that's still home at 30 or whatever, like, you're going to have some sort of skill that you can teach to somebody else that is so automatic and so, what's the word? It comes off so easy to you that it takes almost no time or energy to show it to somebody else. You know what I mean? And I think that people have a hard time with doing selfless things like volunteering or whatever it may be, being a coach or whatever, because they're so exhausted by a life that seems off, that doesn't seem to work for them. But I agree. It's service can come in the form of doing the most simple thing in one patient present moment. Opening a door, see somebody drop their wallet, you pick it up and you take it to them. Like,
don't take their cash.
Yeah, don't take their cash. If you got a soul. But service can come in such small increments that I think what you're saying rings very true. It's just we get so caught up in ourselves and not being able to even do more than we can for ourselves because life's so exhausting that doing anything of service just seems too big, too impossible. But if you can get yourself to do it just once, you share chemical responses with people. It's the dopamine, it's the serotonin, and that's what makes you feel valuable right there, is when you do those little things for the people. Maybe you don't coach a team, maybe you don't have enough time for that, but maybe you have time to volunteer at an event on a weekend.
Yeah.
And you feel valuable.
Yeah.
That's service.
Yeah. And a lot of it just starts with yourself too. Like your point, a lot of people are like, well, I don't have time for this and this and that's and that. And I know that I went through periods of that back and forth of like, yeah, but but then I started looking at my life and I started saying, well, what do I spend my time actually doing? And back in the day, I used to go and I would party every night. Oh, not every night, but like on the weekends. Like, like I was always out.
You're going to give too much away there, Denise.
I know I've tamed myself, I guess. But I started looking at all of the behaviors and it's like, all right, well, I'm watching Netflix for however many hours per day. And I'm staying up late this many hours a night. Like, what am I actually doing? I'm spending this amount of time on social media. Like, I start really looking at all of the different things in my life. And I start realizing like, man, is that really what how I want to spend my time? And as soon as you start saying, okay, no, like I can cut this out, it's like you start giving yourself time back. And then that's when you can start saying, okay, well, I'm not going to stay up as late anymore because I want to actually get 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And I was definitely one of those people where in one phase of my life, I only really got like 15, 20 hours of sleep in a week because I was
God.
Yeah, it was a really bad time.
It was a phase.
It was a phase, luckily behind me. And yeah, like I was just so sleep deprived and so miserable all the time. And then eventually I started changing certain little things bit by bit. And it opened me up to a lot of other things. And eventually I was able to integrate more things that brought me happiness. Because that's the other thing. You don't have to jump into service right away. I think a lot of it is also exploring the things that you actually like to do. Okay, I'm going to try this a little bit. No, I don't really like that. Okay, I'll try that. Oh, actually, I do kind of like this. And then you dive deeper into that. And eventually that can lead you into other avenues where you're like, oh yeah, I can help you with this, or I can do that, and blah, blah, blah. And again, it begins with small acts of service, but yeah, you have to start with yourself first. You can't just start throwing in random shit when you don't have time for it. Otherwise, you're not really going to dedicate yourself to it the way that you would otherwise if you were clear and grounded and balanced.
Yeah, one of my earliest articles was, oh man, if I went back to read it, I'd probably be mad at myself. But it was knowing the difference or the importance of selfishness over selflessness. And the reason I put that out there is because we get to define how any word that, lays in the dictionary, and so people automatically put a negative connotation on selfish. You know what I mean? But to take care of yourself, to have self-love and to have self-care, you do have to be selfish. You do have to make time for yourself. And in doing that for yourself, I think that's what creates selflessness. You know, if I hadn't put, to your point, if I hadn't put so much time into powerlifting and learning what it takes to initiate the body all at once, to recruit every muscle fiber for one single lift at max capacity and the max capacity of my body, I would have never found this almost hobby of helping other people perform powerlifting and do it correctly. And it's because I wanted to do it. You know, I would take time away out of my own day and my own training to help somebody that was struggling. Because a lot of times, you know, the trainers will only talk to you when, you know, you're paid, or, you know, when they're paid to work with you. And, you know, most other people in a gym are just doing their own thing. And so a lot of individuals that don't know training that deeply step into a gym and are highly intimidated, especially an athlete style gym where it's filled with bodybuilders and filled with powerlifters and filled with, you know, bikini competitors. That can be really hard for people. And I made it my job to speak up to people, to just help them a little bit. And if they didn't want anything past that, I'm okay with it. But I had to speak up because I was in the same position, and it super sucks to be in that position. And that became a service that, you know, wasn't hard for me at all. Like, I was already there, you know, and people appreciate just being talked to and being encouraged and being supported.
Yeah.
You know?
And so to kind of wrap things up, what would you say are some of the words that you would provide for others to try to support their journey along their path to growth or development or whatever?
Well, knowing my own character and knowing everything that I've gone through now, I think the most important things that I would tell anyone is to learn how to be resilient, because in the beginning you're going to fail 90% of the time. And the 10% that you do succeed, it's going to be in very small increments. And secondly, to question absolutely everything, because you're so stuck in who you are and who your beliefs are that may have only been a single dimension forever from childhood. Maybe it's based off trauma. Maybe it's based off, you know, whatever difficult life experiences. Is the more open-minded you are and the more you question everything, the more you expand, the wiser you become when you can come from a neutral position. So the biggest things that have helped me and the biggest things that I would tell anybody is to learn how to be resilient, not just seeking success, but being resilient against failure and questioning the fuck out of everything, being open-minded.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually something that you'll never stop doing. Just questioning. Just ask questions. Like it's a basic skill for the rest of your life. Yeah.
Philosophy itself is not meant to answer anything. It's to question all of it. You know, it's never ending. You know, that's why philosophy is so valuable. That's why it works.
Yeah. And so people can follow you on The Rebel Minded, and they'll probably get some more insight into these types of questions and ideas that you play with as well, right?
Yes, of course. If anybody wants to find me, I have a podcast called The Rebel Minded Podcast. You can find me on Substack at therebelminded.substack.com, and you can find me on Medium, where you can find all of my blogs and articles. I create a lot of similar content across all three of those, and it's where I do my best work, if you can call it that.
That's awesome. Yes. So I'll add all of that into the description. So please feel free to check out his work. I've listened to some of the podcasts and I've really enjoyed it, but I'm also a nerd like that too. So I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense, man. So yeah, so definitely go check that out. And So Zackary, thank you so much for your time.
Of
I
course,
really appreciate it. Yes, it was. It was a lot of fun. I always love asking questions and diving deep into a bunch of things. So I'm sure we'll do that some more and maybe on your podcast one day. So we'll see what happens.
Let's do it.
Yeah. All right. And to everybody out there listening, thank you so much for your time. I hope you got something out of this. And if not, then I don't know, you weren't listening hard enough, but it's fine. All right. All right. Well, have a good one, everybody. Thanks so much.
Peace.